to talk to you about something a little bit different, not about trading or anything like that, but about actually how much Bitcoin can you actually own, right? Consider that there are 21 million Bitcoins. That is 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. There are 8.2 billion people alive on Earth today, estimate. There are 19.7 million Bitcoins already mined out of the 21 million max supply that can ever be mined. And the estimated target date for that is somewhere in the year 2140, which is about 116 years from now, which means that there's far less than, there's like between 6 and 7% of Bitcoin left to be mined over the next 116 years. Assuming, and it's a false assumption, but, actually, before we get to that, the projected, we'll do this. Assuming that Bitcoin was already fully mined and equally distributed between 8.2 billion people on Earth right now, right? If you were to divide 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis by 8.2 billion people, you get something like 256,000 Satoshis, I think 256,047 Satoshis per person. That is less than just over 1/4 of 1% of one Bitcoin, since there are 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin. So 1/4 of 1%. In other words, 0.0025 Bitcoin. That is the average that you could actually hope to get if it was fully distributed equally among all humans. Now consider this. By the year 2140, when Bitcoin is actually fully mined, there will probably be an estimated 11.5 billion people thereabouts on Earth. Maybe it'd be 11.3, maybe it'd be 11.6, who knows? Depends how populations grow over the next 116 years. But there'll be more than 11 billion people, okay? We'll call it 11.5. And at that time, when it's fully distributed, it's going to be far less, right? It's going to be an additional 25 or so percent less than 0.0025 Bitcoin per person, right? It'll be about 0.0018 or something like that per person, 0.0019. So less than 2,000th of a Bitcoin. Now consider that most of the Bitcoins are already in the hands of the top 1%. Governments, banks, central banks, big whales, financial institutions, etc. They own the vast majority of it, like more than 70%, right? And there are only 1 million wallet addresses with one or more Bitcoins, which means the other 500 million, or whatever, 250 million wallet addresses that have any Bitcoin in them have less than one Bitcoin. But many of them have 0.9, 0.8, 0.7, 0.6, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, or 0.1 Bitcoin, right? They don't all have 1% or less. Many do, but many don't of that remaining amount. Considering that most of the Bitcoins that are mined are already in the hands of whales who have more than a Bitcoin, who have more than like 10 or 15 or 100 Bitcoins. And by the time we get to 2140, we have 11.5 billion people on Earth. And at the same time, anywhere from 3 to 5 million Bitcoin are already inaccessible because they've been lost, whatever. They're not accessible anymore. Like the seed phrases have been lost, people can't get to them. People have lost thousands of Bitcoins. It happens. People send Bitcoins to the wrong, even today, people send Satoshis to the wrong addresses. Some people even send whole Bitcoins sometimes to the wrong address and just burn a whole Bitcoin into like inaccessible, gone forever. Consider that. And what you have is about somewhere like between 13 to 15 million, or 13.5 to 15.5 million Bitcoin available, maybe 16.5 million Bitcoin available in the actual circulating, or not even circulating, in the actual supply that have been mined. And they're mostly being held in wallets by the whales, by the banks, etc. They're not moving them, they're not selling them, not anytime soon. And they're not going to just freely distribute them to the masses when it hits $1 million. They're just going to keep those Bitcoins, right? People are going to be trading for scraps. When you do the math, the average person is never going to be able to have 50,000 Satoshis. I'll say it again. The average person is probably never going to have 50,000 Satoshis. Right now, you can buy 50,000 Satoshis for about $29 with the price of Bitcoin around 58,000 bucks currently. Right? Today is what, July 8th or something like that, 2024. Right now, the price of Bitcoin, it's a Thursday, the price of Bitcoin went back up a bit, like 6% already today. And the last I looked, anyway, some minutes ago, it was around $58,000. That means for $29, you can own as much as the average person could ever actually own realistically, ever. If you take into account all the numbers I just threw at you. That's $29. I'm not telling you to get it. I'm not telling you not to get it. I'm just saying, statistically, those are the numbers, right? You are not statistically likely to own more than that. Of course, if you already do, great, good for you. You beat the stats, right? But if you haven't made that purchase and you want to have as much or more than the average person, that's the current rate. $29 gets you in league with the average, right? If you want to be above average, then anything more than that will be above average. Right? If you want 100,000 Satoshis, which is 1/1000th of a Bitcoin, then that'll cost you like $58. If you can afford a whole percent of a Bitcoin, right now it's like $580. Right? $580 puts you several times more than the average person will ever be able to own. Ever. Like several times more. Right? If you manage to accumulate 10% of a Bitcoin right now for about $5,800, that puts you, something like 40 times more than the average person will ever be able to own. Right? So just think about that. 50,000 Satoshis. That is the average amount of Satoshis that the average person will ever be able to own by the time it's fully mined and distributed. And it'll never be fully mined and evenly distributed. That's just given the numbers as they are today. And if we don't see even more accumulation by the huge whales, and we are seeing that constantly, they want to get as much of it as possible. I would honestly be surprised if there will be more than 1 million Bitcoin in the hands of non-whales within the next decade or two, like in total. be surprised. Anyway, some numbers to think about. Happy trading.